Okay. Yes. Thank you for the excellent introduction for us. I am going to speak about the diabetes part. So, I am going to talk about the diabetes and dapagliflozin with gliflozin in mind. That is the total gliflozins I'll be talking about, and in particular the dapagliflozin. So before going into gliflozins, let's take some definitions in mind. So what is diabetes? So as per ADA, diabetes mellitus is a group of metabolic diseases characterized by hyperglycemia resulting from defects in insulin secretion, insulin action, or both. So relative beta cell failure is the primary cause of type 2 diabetes, and as you can see from this chart, it is progressive. Approximately 50% of beta cell is lost when you are pre-diabetic and 80% when you are being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. So this is the most serious part. That is, the time people have been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, they have already lost nearly 80% of their beta cells. So how diabetes progresses? There is type 2 diabetes. We are talking about type 2 diabetes in this lecture only. So we have genetics as well as acquired problems like obesity, sedentary lifestyle, and aging. This leads to insulin resistance, and this is particularly common in our part of the world. Insulin resistance in turn causes hyperinsulinemia, and this causes compensated insulin resistance with normal glucose tolerance initial part, which may be 10 years prior to development of diabetes. Then comes impaired glucose tolerance. Again, because of genetics and then acquired causes like glucotoxicity, increased free fatty acid levels, and other as mentioned above, we get beta cell failure. And this leads to type 2 diabetes, which means increased insulin resistance, increased glucose output, and decreased insulin secretion. So we have now what we call as ominous octet regarding the pathogenesis of type 2 diabetes. So what is ominous octet? It is, as we have already discussed, decreased insulin secretion, then decreased incretin effect, then increased lipolysis, increased glucose reabsorption. I will come to this later. Then decreased glucose uptake, neurotransmitter dysfunction, increased hepatic glucose production, and lastly, increased glucagon secretion inappropriate to amount of insulin present. So the top 10 countries of diabetics in adults. So as you can see, India is in rank 2, and in near future also the rank will remain unchanged, and I doubt that we might overtake China. What are the distinctive features of type 2 diabetes in India or South Asia in particular? So possible etiopathogenesis, genetic predisposition, environmental factors like current economic prosperity, urbanization, decreased physical activity, then nutrient abundance like high intake of refined cereal, low intake of dietary fiber, fruit and vegetables. And this leads to Asian phenotype, which is despite a low BMI, we have high waist circumference, high waist to hip ratio, high visceral fat, increased insulin resistance, high prevalence of atherogenic dyslipidemia, and early beta cell defect. Leads to clinical profile of type 2 diabetes in India, which is high incidence and prevalence occurring at young age, occurrence at low BMI. That's the reason compared to the world, we have reduced our cutoff BMI to 23. High prevalence of coronary artery disease, low prevalence of vascular disease, and possible less microvascular disease like retinopathy, nephropathy, etc. And this leads to some issues in management in our country. That is, we get low awareness level, high prevalence of undiagnosed disease, unaffordability of care, unavailability of trained medical and paramedical personnel, particularly in the field of diabetes. So coming to gliflozin. So going to a bit of a history, that is fluorescein, a bitter white glycoside isolated from apple tree bark by French chemist in 1835, is a naturally occurring inhibitor of both SGLT1 and SGLT2 and was used for treatment of diabetes in pre-insulin era. And unfortunately, after insulin, we forgot about this. And then familial renal glycosuria, a rare inherited condition caused by a mutation of SGLT2 gene. Patients with this condition have varying degrees of glycosuria. They remain asymptomatic. They do not become dehydrated or become hypoglycemic. They can excrete up to 125 grams of glucose per day. So the reason for presenting this renal glycosuria is that, as in these patients, those who are on SGLT2 inhibitors do not get dehydrated or hypoglycemic usually. So in healthy individuals, the renal glomeruli filters about 180 grams of glucose per day. Virtually all of the refined glucose is reabsorbed in the proximal tubule through SGLT2 and SGLT1, with SGLT2 accounting for 90% in the S1 and S2 segment of the renal tubule, and SGLT1 accounts for only 10% in the ST3 segment. When blood glucose increases above the renal threshold, that is about 180 to 90 milligram per deciliter, the capacity of transporters are exceeded, resulting in urinary glucose excretion. So urinary glucose excretion via SGLT2 inhibition. That is what happens when we inhibit the SGLT2. So SGLT2 inhibitors reduce glucose reabsorption in the proximal tubule, leading to urinary glucose excretion and osmotic diuresis. However, this osmotic diuresis is initially, later on, the body gets accustomed with it. So coming to the scientific part, that was a cartoon to, just to look at how things happen. So coming to the scientific part, that is how there's renal glucose reabsorption and excretion. From this graph, we see that the amount of glucose filtered increases linearly with increasing plasma glucose concentration. Tmax is the maximum for glucose reabsorption, which is around 180. So whenever the glucose level in the glomerulus exceeds this level, the glucose starts excreting through urine. However, glucose reabsorption is increased in type 2 diabetes. So the reducing the amount of glucose excreted at a given level of blood glucose. SGLT2 inhibitor lower the amount of glucose that can be reabsorbed. That is, it lowers the renal threshold, that is Tmax. And this increases glucose excretion. So what happens because of this SGLT2 inhibition? So hyperglycemia, because of SGLT2 inhibition, the kidneys start excreting high amount of glucose, and that leads to weight loss. On top of that, because of the glucose excretion, it lowers plasma glucose and hence increases the weight loss, leading to metabolic adaptation. It enhances insulin sensitivity in the liver, and it improves, because of the low blood sugar, it improves the hyperinsulinemia. And this slide shows the difference the sites of action of glucose co-transporter, that is SGLT1 and SGLT2. SGLT1 is responsible for intestinal glucose absorption, and SGLT2 is the main transporter responsible for glucose reabsorption from renal proximal convoluted tubule. SGLT1 also contributes to glucose reabsorption from the renal proximal convoluted tubule. And as you know about the glut, so glut search for glucose reabsorption in glucose absorption inside the cells. SGLT2 expression is mainly in the kidneys. However, SGLT1 expression is mainly in the gastrointestinal tract, skeletal muscle, heart, and to a small degree in the kidney. That is 10%. These are the overview of other important glucose transporter proteins. I am not going into details. I'm just showing it to make our physiology complete. Just to touch upon this new effect, that is SGLT2 inhibition and direct effect on sodium hydrogen exchange in the myocardium. So here you can see that because of SGLT2 inhibition, intracellular sodium and calcium level decreases in the myocardium, and in this way it is helping in the ischemia. Regarding the cardiac part, it will be Dr. Rao who will be taking more. I am just giving a brief for my completion sake. Consequences of inhibition of SGLT2 on glucose, salt, and water excretion, as well as its potential metabolic impact on kidney, liver, and heart function. As you can see that glucosuria reduces total body sodium, water, as well as this sodium hydrogen exchanger, leading to less incidence of heart failure. Also, it reduces sympathetic activity, leading to decreased fibrosis, decreased CKD, DKD progression, and reduction of weight, increasing lipolysis and increasing gluconeogenesis leads to reduced NAFLD/NASH in the liver. All of that also reduces your blood pressure, angiotensinogen, endothelin, TGF-beta, etc. Just frozen. Okay. So how to explain other pleiotropic effects of SGLT2 inhibitors? As you know that it seems that SGLT2 inhibitors has other effects which cannot be explained by its effect on the kidneys and heart. Induction of fasting transcriptional paradigm by SGLT2 inhibitors underlines probably their action to reduce heart failure and serious renal adverse effects. So this is what we mean by fasting transcriptional paradigm, that is SGLT2 inhibition somehow activates this AMPK and SART1. AMPK and SART1 activation leads to antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects, leading to amelioration of cardiomyopathy and nephropathy. And also it causes enhanced autophagic flux, causing clearance of damaged organelles. On top of that, it mildly increases the ketones in the body, which is a better fuel for the heart. And it also activates the HIF2 alpha, that is heat shock protein, which increases the erythrocytosis as well. So those who are on this medication has high, the anemia also improves a bit. Normally, when a cell is in a favorable environment, it grows, reproduces, maintains itself, and that's how usual the favorable environment milieu is. However, when there is hostile environment like hyperglycemia, two types of programs are activated in our body. One is called defense program, where there is increased mTORC, MAPK, CMYC activities leading to stress, anabolism, glycolysis, and immune activation, which further can increase atherosclerosis. However, there is another side to it, which is called dormancy program. Here, all the good enzymes are activated like MPK, FOXO, FGF21, etc., which causes energy conservation and also increases stress, increases resistance to stress, hence retards formation of atherosclerosis. So what is being thought is that this SGLT2 inhibitors, they actually stop this defense program and encourages the dormancy program, which in effect retards the the host atherosclerosis and other immune modifications. So coming to guidelines. Now I'm not going to bore you with this ADA 2020 guideline. What I'm going to show you is that in this guideline, you can see all SGLT2 inhibition has been approved in here. And as you can see, all of them are approved quite top. And only if you see the last column where it is written as cost is a major issue, then at that column, the SGLT2 hasn't been written. But given the current scenario in India where the SGLT2 inhibitors are available, it is comparatively cheaper price, I think this column should have SGLT2 inhibitor also, especially when it is in Indian context. So if you see currently SGLT2 inhibitor will be everywhere as it is metformin. So coming to few other guidelines, nice guideline. Here dapagliflozin in combination therapy for treating type 2 diabetes. So here it is said that dapagliflozin in combination with insulin with or without other anti-diabetic drugs is recommended as an option for treating type 2 diabetes. So coming to a few studies about dapagliflozin. So dapagliflozin treatment for type 2 diabetes, a systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials. So the objective was a meta-analysis of RCTs was conducted to assess the efficacy and safety of DAPA treatment. This data source is from Medline, Embase, etc. Study selections. Studies included type 2 diabetic subjects who had been treated with DAPA and recorded HbA1c as an outcome. 10 RCTs were included. Fixed or random effect model was used to pool the results. So finding from the study was that DAPA treatment was associated with reduction in HbA1c of about 0.5. Fasting plasma glucose decreased by about 1.06 millimole, about 25 milligrams. So body weight reduction by about 1.6. Hence, the DAPA monotherapy did not lead to hypoglycemia. So the conclusion was dapagliflozin is an effective treatment for type 2 diabetes. Another study, the aim of this study was to assess the efficacy and safety of DAPA as a monotherapy in type 2 diabetes and provide theoretical basis for clinical rational use of the drug. Again, the study design was meta-analysis of randomized placebo-controlled clinical studies in patients with type 2. 6 randomized controlled trials, including 2,033 patients, were analyzed. Finding from the study was, as compared to placebo, DAPA treatment was associated with a reduction of HbA1c of 0.6, fasting blood glucose of reduction of 1.3 millimoles per liter, and body weight reduction about 1.5 kilo. And again, DAPA did not lead to hypoglycemia. So DAPA monotherapy was well tolerated and effective in reducing level of HbA1c, fasting plasma glucose, body weight in patients with type 2 diabetes without increasing hypoglycemia. So in this review, in Drugs 2019, that oral dapagliflozin once daily improves glycemic control, body weight, blood pressure, and reduces the risk of CV death or heart failure and possibly progression of renal disease. So again, this paper regarding DAPA monotherapy in type 2 diabetic patients with inadequate glycemic control by diet and exercise. Objective of this study was to evaluate the efficacy and safety of DAPA in treatment-naive patients with type 2 diabetes. So changes in glycemic parameter over time, mean changes from baseline in A1C after adjustment of base value. As you can see that DAPA 5 and 10 reduces HbA1c from the base value by about 0.7 to 0.8. Similar was the changes of fasting blood glucose, so between 24 to 28, and mean change from baseline in body weight after the adjustment of base value, again about 2.8 kg to 3.2 kg, depending upon the dose. So another study on effect of dapagliflozin in patients with type 2 diabetes who have inadequate glycemic control with metformin. So here the objective was to assess the efficacy and safety of DAPA in patients who have inadequate glycemic control with metformin. The charts looks exactly same as before except the HbA1c percentage here. So as you can see that DAPA 10 and 5, the HbA1c is between 7.13 to 7.4, while those who are only on metformin had a 7.79. Similar is the multi-center double-blind parallel placebo-controlled trial of 546 adults with diabetes who are receiving daily metformin of more than 1500 milligram per day. So the lines already showing that the change from baseline at 24 weeks by about 1.3 to 1.9, and the fasting blood sugar between 3 to 2.9. So consistent reduction in HbA1c across a broad range of commonly prescribed treatments. So on monotherapy compared to placebo, it is coming down to 0.89 and placebo 0.23. On metformin, the HbA1c reduction by 0.3 in metformin group, that is placebo group, who already on metformin, to 0.84. So difference about 0.5 again. Add on to sulfonylurea, difference is about 0.7. Add on to DPP4 inhibitor plus minus metformin, the change in HbA1c is 0.5. And add on to insulin, the change in HbA1c is about 0.6. However, the last one, that is the insulin, here actually the dose of insulin was reduced in the active treatment arm because the patients were getting too much hypoglycemia. So here the effect was much better. Again, consistent reduction in HbA1c across a broad range of treatment in patients with baseline HbA1c more than 7. This is common with all anti-diabetic drugs, that is higher the baseline, the better the level you get. So take home message is dapagliflozin lowers glucose levels independently of insulin action, provides effective glycemic control, and reduces body weight and blood pressure, reduces risk of worsening heart failure or death from CV causes, reduces progression of renal disease, low risk of hypoglycemia, and is cost effective. The red one, the last one, is specially for dapagliflozin. So dapagliflozin should be a part of therapeutic regime for all eligible type 2 diabetes patients. Now coming to appropriate use for optimum benefit, it should not be used in severe CKD, pregnant and breastfeeding women because we don't know about the risk, and acute stressful events like severe medical and surgical consideration. And observe caution in risk of volume depletion, that is frail elderly concomitant loop diuretic use, predisposition to dehydration or renal impairment, complicated UTI, temporary discontinuation is recommended, history of recurrent UTI, probably better not to use, condition of fasting, that is risk of starvation and precipitation of euglycemic decay, and patients with already very elevated hematocrit. Particularly for diabetic economy in India, the key points, that is in India, the total annual expenditure by patients on diabetes care is on average rupees 10,000 in urban and 6,260 in rural areas. Several studies have found that lower income groups spend a larger proportion of their income on diabetes care. Urban populations spend more on absolute terms, and that cost of complication weighted heavily on overall cost. 89% of patients use their household income to fund the monitoring and treatment of their diabetes. Hence, this low price DAPA in our country will go a long way to reduce their stress. What is the ultimate solution for diabetes? If you are not diabetic, prevent it with a healthy lifestyle. And if you are diabetic, fight it with healthy lifestyle. Thank you for listening.